Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024. Happy October! And in this video, I want to look at tomorrow's eclipse. So tomorrow we have an annular eclipse of the sun. So that means that we've got sun conjunct moon. So the reason it's called an annular eclipse, it comes from the Latin annulus, which means a ring. And what it means is that the moon does not entirely cover the sun because of the ring effect. Now that is because the moon is far away from the Earth. It is at its apogee. And so because it's further away from the Earth, it's smaller, or at least it looks smaller. And that means it doesn't actually manage to cover the full disk of the sun. So it's not like a total eclipse of the moon. Sorry, a total eclipse of the sun. It is weaker. And perhaps we shouldn't necessarily get too excited about this new moon eclipse, which is tomorrow, which is on Wednesday. But still, I think it's an important event, and in this video I want to look at this eclipse, what it might mean, whereabouts on Earth it might have maximum impact, and a few famous people who might be affected by it. For example, Boris Johnson and Princess Catherine and the Argentine President Javier Milei. But okay, so let me now look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, the first day of October. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be really happy if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be really, really happy if you were to subscribe. Anyway, let's see what's going on today. I'm not promising that it's an especially dramatic day. So tomorrow, of course, we have the annular eclipse. So we kind of got the run up to the annular eclipse. It's the end of one lunar cycle. So we can see this lunar cycle very much coming to its end here. If we look at the chart for today. So, there is the sun in Libra. There's a moon at 26 Virgo. So the moon is heading towards the conjunction of the sun, but it's not quite there yet today. And so it's the end of the cycle. We had a new moon around 4 weeks ago, and now we're coming up to another new moon, and it is an ending, and we might feel a bit like that. Perhaps it's not a great time to be starting things because it's all over. Perhaps we should wait until after the new moon before beginning our new projects. Let's wait for October to sort of get underway. Now, the moon today is actually in Virgo, so from a perspective of New York at noon, moon is at 26:54 Virgo. It's the usual thing. Virgo, it's in an earth sign. It's quite a material place of the moon. It's about details, but there is a grand trine in Earth involving the moon. So it's another grand trine in Earth. So we've got this Uranus-Pluto Uranus-Pluto trine that's been hanging around for some time, and Uranus-Pluto is about upheavals and drama and things transforming. I mean, we've just seen the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. That's the kind of event I suppose one might expect with Uranus-Pluto trine. It does seem dramatic. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I did cover Hassan Nasrallah's death, but the reaction, in a strange way, seems to be a little bit muted. I mean, I know there's not a lot of news stories about Hassan Nasrallah, but at the moment, things seem to be relatively peaceful given what's happened. I think Iran is in a difficult position. But anyway, yes, this is not a politics channel. I'm sure you can find out about that elsewhere. But with this Uranus-Pluto trine, you can see the transformation that is around us, and the fact that we're just not happy with the status quo. Things are being challenged. People are being challenged. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, under a lot of pressure. Uranus-Pluto trine, Moon in Virgo making the Grand Trine. So as the Moon moves through the last few degrees of Virgo, things move quickly, and change can happen quickly. And because it's in Earth signs, you think that the Earth itself can move. And I suppose we had that. We had the Grand Trine involving the Sun, when the Sun was at late Virgo, then involving the Mercury was at late Virgo, and it was always this sense that things can move, and the material world is not there forever. It can change. Now, the Moon also makes an opposition aspect to Neptune, and so today, Moon opposition Neptune, things at times may be a little bit undermining. Moon in Virgo likes to keep everything very simple, straightforward, but when it's opposition Neptune, things can happen that the Moon in Virgo doesn't quite understand, doesn't quite appreciate. Moon in Virgo wants everything to be well organized and wants everything to be straightforward, but then Neptune comes along and makes a complete mess of it. So that's one manifestation of Moon opposition Neptune. Moon does square Jupiter too, sort of very much at the beginning of the day, I would have thought, certainly if you're in the Americas, but with Moon square Jupiter, Moon, with the Moon making an opposition to Neptune, square to Jupiter, sort of Moon sort of making a sesquiquadrate to the Jupiter-Neptune midpoint. There's Moon in Virgo trying to be organized, but then Jupiter and Neptune come together and perhaps trip the Moon up, perhaps encourage the Moon to go too far. Now, the Moon does eventually move into Libra, and in fact it moves into Libra London time at 11:20 p.m. So if you're in the UK, yes, you do get 40 minutes right at the end of the day of Moon in Libra. If you're in the Americas, then late afternoon, early evening, the Moon does have this sign change, Moon moving from Virgo to Libra, and as soon as the Moon moves into Libra, that is a real run up to the new Moon, because then when the Moon moves into Libra, the Sun and the Moon are in the same sign, and there may just be a sense that things are changing. You can start to get the glimpse of something new, and perhaps with the Moon leaving Virgo, there'll be perhaps less focus on material stuff, details, money, and more about conversation and thinking, and being perhaps a little more relaxed and detached. So that's the overall planetary picture set for New York. Let me just look at this chart from the perspective of Sydney, Australia. I use Sydney, Australia because it's just a representative of Australasia and East Asia. This area is just in a completely different time zone, and it is different. So the Moon was at 26 Virgo set for New York at noon on October the 1st, 2024. But if we set that for Sydney, Australia, we see the Moon is at 20 Virgo. So it's almost in the middle of Virgo. So the Moon in Virgo it's much earlier in the sign in Australia, and there's certainly no chance of the Moon moving into Libra on that day. Still got 10 degrees to go. And I suppose the main aspect, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, is the Moon in Virgo square Jupiter. So that's might be the sort of the predominant energy. And with that Moon square Jupiter, I suppose there may be a temptation to exaggerate. Now, it may be that the moon in Virgo gets exaggerated. So moon in Virgo is about looking at some details and trying to understand the way things work. But Jupiter and Gemini might go into overdrive. You might be too focused on details, on things that aren't particularly important. There might be a viewpoint which is somewhat microscopic. Microscopic in the sense that you want to focus on very small things and you want to put lots of energy into focusing on very small things and small details and perhaps small criticisms as well, but that might not be the right thing to do. Now, turning to the heliocentric picture, so that's the new moon. By the way, that's at 7:49 p.m. London time, but I'll be talking about the new moon later. So here is the positions of the planets for New York, and let me just look at the heliocentric view. I haven't checked this beforehand. I should have done. So heliocentrically, we have Mercury at 11 Libra, not doing a great deal, except it is making a trine to Jupiter. Mercury trine Jupiter heliocentrically. I think that is a relatively nice aspect, Mercury trine Jupiter. It is optimistic. It thinks about possibilities, and Mercury Jupiter has got lots to talk about. And I suppose from a cosmic point of view, with Mercury trine Jupiter, it's like saying that the solar system is in the mood for communicating. It's in the mood for telling us stuff, and it's looking forward, and perhaps there is a fundamental optimism pulsing through the solar system, maybe, and perhaps that's our challenge, to look at things in the best possible light, to sort of always look on the bright side of life. So there's Mercury opposition the Earth. Remember, Mercury opposition Earth is the same as Sun conjunct Sun, but it's still pretty close. So there are thoughts that are challenging with Mercury opposition Pluto. We may at first see things as being hopeless or just overwhelming, but Jupiter comes along. So the Earth is making that sextile to Jupiter. Mercury is making a trine to Jupiter. So if we can't see things in a positive light, perhaps we need to keep trying. If we look at things again and again and again, slowly, we may start to see things in a way that actually isn't so bad. Anyway, let's now look at things from a perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, October the 1st, 2024. Aries, it still feels as if there are a few things that haven't been done and perhaps that need to be done. And it's probably not a good idea to delay. If you wait until tomorrow, you just might not have a chance to finish what you're trying to finish, because you'll have new challenges to worry about, new challenges to be excited about perhaps as well. And it is worth putting in that final bit of effort. It might just feel that everything is in the right place, but it's not quite there. And in fact, it seems that there are a couple of things that once you actually start to focus on them, they can lead into other things. And I suppose that may be connected with the fact that we've got this Grand Trine coming up, this Grand Trine, Moon in Virgo, trine Uranus in Taurus, trine Pluto in Capricorn. And so by working at something that seems to be fairly small and insignificant, you may actually be doing something very important. You may be creating the foundations of, I think, real change. And so what perhaps seems to be unimportant actually could be completely crucial. Now, in the process, there's no need to exhaust yourself. There's no need to throw everything you've got, mind, body and soul, into sorting something out, because with that Grand Trine in Earth signs, it doesn't take much. Just a little bit of digging, a little bit of focus, it's just all it takes, and then suddenly something shifts, and then everything else shifts. So perhaps it's a situation where you're doing something that feels unimportant, that doesn't seem to be going anywhere, but actually it is quite massive what you're doing, but it might not seem like it at the time. Now, as far as other people are concerned, I don't think that other people are necessarily particularly important today. I think that you can do things on your own. Having said that, remember, Venus is starting to move to a trine of Mars. And, okay, it's not exact yet, but it's getting there. And with this trine between Venus and Mars, your social skills are improving slowly, slowly, slowly. It's getting better. And you're finding yourself in a position where it's much easier to project who you are. And I think there's a sense in which people do understand you. And if you are in the Americas, then today the moon does move into Libra. And the moon moves into Libra late afternoon, early evening, kind of depends where you are. And that does bring a change. I mean, I think quite a substantial change. And I think as soon as the moon moves into Libra, you do start to change your focus. And I think that you do become more focused on the social world. I think less focused on what needs to be done. So yeah, if you're an American Virgo, you could say that you really need to get things done as early in the day as possible, because things are about to change. Now, if you're not in the Americas, then don't worry. Moon is in Virgo all day long. Okay, it's in the UK. It's in Libra for the last 40 minutes of the day. So if you're a Libra in the UK, then and you're up late. I mean, I don't know. I think people in the UK do tend to go to bed later than other parts of the world, or maybe that's my imagination. Certainly, and in terms of Europe and America. I don't know about the Arab world. I remember when I was in Marrakesh a long time ago, people during Ramadan, at 3 a.m, everything was completely busy. People were having a haircut. So I suppose it depends where you are. But in terms of my experience, people in the UK tend to go to bed later than other people. So maybe the last 40 minutes of the day is, if you're in the UK, is going to represent some kind of change. I suppose it depends what you're doing. Anyway, if you are an American Libra, certainly late afternoon, early evening, there could be a change. And I'm hoping that, say by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, things should be done and you should be ready to move on to something else. So that's a broad picture, Aries. It's not, I don't think, a particularly spectacular day. I mean, it's not really, I don't think, going to be spectacular for anyone, really, all things being equal. It's just that astrologically there's not a lot of action. But if you can get the stuff finished, whatever it is you're working on, just get it done today, because just tomorrow might be different. Your focus might have changed. Taurus, we do have a Grand Trine in Earth signs. We have another Grand Trine in Earth signs. This is kind of the third time I've talked about Grand Trine in Earth signs. We had a Grand Trine in Earth signs involving the Sun, and then involving Mercury, and now it is involving the Moon. So we have got, you've got Uranus in Taurus, you've got Moon in Virgo, and you've got Pluto in Capricorn, and the Moon is making a trine to Uranus, and it's making a trine to Pluto. So it does feel, Taurus, that things are moving, that things can just happen, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. Now, I know, Taurus, that you can be quite stuck in your ways and you don't want change, but change can be useful, and it can be change on your terms. So, Taurus, if there's something you want to happen, maybe it's perhaps of a creative nature, you feel that you want things to be more exciting, or you perhaps feel that you need to be better appreciated, or that you need to be in a situation where you're doing things that you're good at. You don't want to do things that are routine, menial, boring, that could be done by someone else. That is important, but you can bring things to bear which you are good at, which can make things happen in a way that is good for you. So you do not have to be satisfied with a situation that you're not happy with. You can create change. But I think to a great extent it has to be on your terms, and it perhaps has to be done in your way, and you shouldn't feel that you need anyone else's help, because right now I'm not convinced that you're going to get much help or support from the outside world. You can see the potential for getting support and help, but I just feel that it's not going to arrive immediately. I just think that at the moment it seems that other people are holding something back, and they will continue to hold things back. So you can't change their minds. Okay, you can try to get something out of them. I mean, you might be successful, but I don't think now is the right time. It's true that Venus is making a trine to Mars slowly, but I don't think that Venus trine Mars is going to help today. I think it's still too far away. It's nearly 4 degrees off is Venus trine Mars. You're starting to feel it. You're starting to feel that people could be important, that certain relationships could be important, but I'm not convinced that today you can expect much to happen. So Taurus, it's just going to be quite important that you do things in your own way, and that you don't feel that you have to try to impress anyone. I think other people are going to be hard to impress. They may actually be hard to offend. It may be you're worried about doing something because you're concerned about what the reaction might be, but maybe you'll be ignored. And sometimes actually, Taurus, it can be quite a good thing to be ignored, because when you're ignored, you actually have a great deal of freedom. Gemini, there is some focus on Mercury still. Remember, when I was talking about yesterday's astrology, I mentioned the fact that the Sun and Mercury are very close to one another. I mean, yesterday the Sun and Mercury were conjunct, and the Sun and Mercury are still conjunct. And so with the Sun conjunct Mercury, you may feel a little bit overwhelmed that something is holding you back, and you can't actually see things clearly with Sun conjunct Mercury. And you want to be positive, you want to be creative, but there's just something in the way. Now, it could be that other people could be the problem. Perhaps you want to share what you're doing with others, but are other people going to be useful? Up to a point, yes, but if you spend too much time with other people, then I think your creativity could be negatively impacted. You just have to spend enough time with other people to benefit from their insights, but not too much time. If you spend too much time with people, then things might just become difficult, and you might feel that you've wasted a lot of time. And it does seem, Gemini, that you are quite ambitious for yourself. for making the absolute most of who you are. And I think if you're honest with yourself, Gemini, there is a certain sense of dissatisfaction, that you feel that things could be better. And I think that's actually a good thing. Sometimes it is good to be dissatisfied because it is motivating to be dissatisfied. You can feel that you should be moving on somewhere else. You feel that the current situation isn't quite good enough, and indeed that you can make it better. And under those circumstances, you might really want to push yourself, and that is certainly a good thing. Now, in terms of creativity and thinking about who you are and what you want to do, I suppose I have to point out that the South Node is conjunct True Black Moon Lilith. And so with South Node conjunct True Black Moon Lilith, the South Node is the past, and the South Node is in Libra. That's quite a creative placement for the South Node. But when it's conjunct True Black Moon Lilith, that could be tricky. Now, it might mean that from a creative perspective, you can start to find creativity in something which is quite dark and something that maybe other people don't want to get involved with. You might find death and decay perhaps inspiring if you're of an artistic nature, and perhaps digging into memories and past memory. Obviously all memories are past. Digging into your memories, and perhaps even digging into other people's memories, thinking about what happened in the past, and perhaps being able to turn it into something creative. So the past perhaps can be creative, but the past could be a trap. And there is some danger, Gemini, that you start to get pleasure in something which perhaps you should have abandoned long ago. So do think about your relationship to the past. It's nice to remember the past, but the past can drag you back. It can drag you back into its womb, I suppose. And so do be aware of that tendency. And so perhaps, I gave this warning about spending too much time with other people, yet it may be that spending some time with other people can be grounding and can prevent you from withdrawing too much into yourself and what you think is important, what you think is healthy, what you think is not necessarily right. Just because something worked, just because something felt good in the past, doesn't mean it's going to work out in the future. And yes, there is still the possibility that there are things from the past that could be useful in a creative sense, but I do think they need to be treated with a certain amount of caution. But still, it is a day when you want to make the absolute most of everything you've got, and you're not happy with second best. And I suppose, Gemini, you're going to want to use all the resources you've got available to pack the greatest punch. And so I suppose you have to be resourceful. You can be resourceful, but just be careful about what resources you use. Some resources should perhaps be out of bounds. Cancer. So Cancer, Moon is moving through late Virgo, and I think that this is a time when things are moving, because we do have a Grand Trine in Earth signs. And so we got the Moon in late Virgo, it's trine Uranus, it's trine Pluto. And so Cancer, I think that this is a time when you're able to make things happen. I mean, if that's what you want, if you want to make things happen, you can make things happen. And there might just be a natural flow as things start to move. One thing moves into something else, and that moves into something else. And so it might seem that nothing much is going on, Cancer, but as soon as you actually take the initiative, as soon as you do something, you will quickly see the results. Now, it may be, Cancer, that it's about the things you say or about the things you communicate. You may say something that appears to be quite trivial, doesn't seem to be important, but it gets picked up on, and it leads to something else, and it leads to something else, and in the end, you've created quite a massive change. Now, with this Grand Trine in Earth signs, just a reminder that the Moon is trining Uranus, Moon is trining Pluto, Uranus is trine Pluto itself. So we've got these two outer planets making a trine, and Uranus and Pluto is about the concept of change, massive change, perhaps transforming change, and perhaps that is what the universe is pushing us towards. I mean, all of us, regardless of our sign, but you, as a Cancerian, with the Moon making that trine to Uranus, trine to Pluto, you're picking up on it, so you can feel which way the universe wants to go, and at that stage, it may be up to you. Do you want to become part of that energy? Do you want to become someone who is down here on Earth helping to create that transformation? Or do you just want to be aware of it? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer there, but you might just be aware of the way things are going, because Cancerians are very sensitive, and they do have a self-protective streak. I suppose Cancerians can be like, they say that animals can pick up on earthquakes before anyone else can. Well, maybe in a sense Cancerians can pick up on earthquakes before anyone else can, because they are sensitive and they just feel that something's not right, and they can feel that a change is in the offing. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about literal earthquakes. I'm just talking about change that is happening in society that is represented by Uranus trine Pluto, because that Uranus trine Pluto is still very much in existence, and you as a Cancerian are picking up on it, and I'm just hoping that you can use it to help yourself and align yourself with what's going on in the cosmos. Now, if you are an American Cancer, then late afternoon, early evening, the Moon does change sign. It does move out of Virgo into Libra. And so with that sign change, Cancer, if you're an American Cancer, there may be a certain time during the day, late afternoon, early evening, when suddenly you can feel the energy has changed and that you want to slow down. And perhaps part of the reason you'll want to slow down is you're realizing that there is a new moon coming up. And of course, that new moon is tomorrow, and the lunation cycle is very important to Cancerians. And so perhaps you want to slow down in preparation for that new moon. Now, if you're not in the Americas, then the moon will move into Libra tomorrow. And so tomorrow is I suppose, the day of the new moon. But at some stage, Cancer, even if it's not today, it'll be tomorrow. There'll be a time when you just will want to slow down and start to take stock of what's happening and start preparing for tomorrow's annular eclipse. Leo, you feel that maybe things aren't moving as fast as they should be moving, and there's a certain temptation to feel frustrated. There are things you would really like to do and you'd really like to make them happen, but you can't, and it just seems that the time is absolutely not right. And rather than get annoyed, rather than get frustrated, you should perhaps just accept the situation and not feel that there's anything that has to be done. And if you were to try to take the initiative, if you were to do something dramatic, I'm not convinced that it would actually work out. And perhaps, Leo, it's a time when you do have to be aware of your weaknesses as well as your strengths. You can't be strong in all departments of life, and also some days are better than other days. And I don't think that today, from a Leo perspective, is particularly spectacular. I think that you you want to just make sure that everything is in order. The moon is moving through late Virgo, so moon moving through late Virgo is not particularly inspiring. Okay, it does make a trine to Uranus. I will give you that. And I suppose with the moon trine Uranus, that trine could be useful in terms of material stuff, money, career, business. There may be a few things that you could actually start to realize. So if you do something of a material nature to do with money, spreadsheets, that kind of thing, or you're thinking about financial organization, not just your financial organization, maybe other people's financial organization, maybe a company's financial organization. If you're doing something like that, then you might have some insights if you make the effort, and that could be useful. But I don't want to overstate the point. I think that it's kind of take it or leave it. If that's what you want to do, then yeah, you can do stuff to make yourself more insightful about money. I suppose there's a Grand Trine in Earth signs, and the moon is in Virgo, late Virgo, which is a sign often connected with money and finance in the Leo chart. So if you want to take advantage of that, that would be great. But otherwise, you might want to just bide your time and don't get excited about any one thing. You might think that you've realized something, but whatever you realize, whatever you think is important, always try to get a sense of perspective. There is a Sun conjunct Mercury, and so with the Sun conjunct Mercury, it's still there. It was exact yesterday, so it's starting to fade a bit, the Sun conjunct Mercury, but it may be a situation where you're tempted to say things before you're ready to say them, before you've double-checked them. So if you do feel a passing moment of excitement, a passing moment where you feel you've got to tell the world about something, then I would suggest that you hold your tongue. I'm not convinced that now is the right time for important communications. And I suppose it's also the reminder that it's in a run-up to a new moon. There's an annular eclipse, which is tomorrow. And new moons do involve the Sun conjunct Moon. And, of course, the Sun is your ruler. So perhaps in this run-up to the new moon, then there are going to be moments where you just need to just work out what's going on. And perhaps if you're thinking about doing anything of a dramatic nature, you should perhaps wait until after the new moon. But really, I kind of say the same to everyone. We're still at the end of a lunar cycle now. Let's wait for the new lunar cycle to see what your next step should be. Virgo, you feel that things are not perfect, and I think that's good, actually. I mean, if we feel that everything is perfect, then we're just going to get complacent, aren't we? And we're not going to be able to really make the most of our potential. And so, Virgo, you know that something could be done better. And I think actually you're going to be quite self-critical today. And so that's a good thing because it allows you to push yourself harder. Okay, don't push yourself too hard. You don't want to exhaust yourself, but work on what needs to be worked on. And don't be satisfied with something that is okay, because it should be good. It should be excellent. I mean, it can be good. It can be excellent. And so perhaps, Virgo, you need to let loose your perfectionist spirit. There's nothing wrong with being a perfectionist if the situation is right. And I think that, it's true that perfectionism can drive Virgos crazy. But today it might be a good idea to be a perfectionist, to do whatever you can to make things as good as possible. Because I think you have the chance here to do a really good job, and you're going to get a further boost by the fact that we have a Grand Trine in Earth signs. So the moon is in late Virgo. The moon is trine Pluto. The moon is trine Uranus, and Uranus and Pluto are in a trine as well. So that moon in Virgo really picks up on the cosmic energy, and it makes you feel that things are really flowing. So yeah, if you make the effort to make things better, then I think you will be rewarded. And it doesn't take much. You put a little bit of energy in and things really explode into life. And so I think overall, Virgo, I think there's plenty of scope for optimism here. And I think you very much know what needs to be done. So, some of the 12 signs today I've been a little bit negative on in places, but not for you. I think that things really can move, and you shouldn't be afraid of things. You shouldn't be afraid of involving yourself with something which is new and challenging. Sometimes you need to be challenged. You've got most of the answers, but you haven't got all the answers. And in your attempt to look for all the answers, remember, there is a perfectionist streak. You might actually think it's possible to find all the answers. Of course, it's actually impossible. But in your quest to find as many answers as possible, you might discover things which are really surprising, which perhaps force you to reconsider some of the fundamentals of who you are and what you're trying to achieve. But again, this is a good thing. It is all about progress. And look at yourself as a complex human being with many different abilities, and just see what you can do to really create change. And you can do it. And don't feel that you've got all the time in the world, though, because the moon moves quickly. If you're in the Americas, by the late afternoon, early evening, the moon will be out of Virgo and the Grand Trine will have gone. If you're not in the Americas, yeah, you'll have more time. You'll have the rest of the day. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, you might have time, moving into tomorrow. The Grand Trine might be around, but it's just not going to last forever. So Virgo, when you see a chance, do take it today. And remember that you are in a little bit of a hurry. You are a perfectionist. And I know that perfectionism, yeah, as I've said, perfectionism can be a problem. But today it's okay to be a perfectionist and give it everything you've got. And I don't want to say any more. I don't want to spoil things by talking too much. Libra. It's true that tomorrow there is a new moon in Libra. It's an annular new moon eclipse, but it's tomorrow. It's not today. And today it's kind of the end of things. It's the end of a lunar cycle, and I think you may be feeling that. You feel that maybe you're wrapping up on stuff you've been involved in over the last few weeks, but it's quite difficult to really think about anything new because just the time isn't right. Perhaps you'd like to think about new stuff, think about new chances, but I don't think that is appropriate. I think that it's more about wrapping things up. Now, I think some Librans may feel the temptation to start something new, but I think if you were to do that, you'd be jumping the gun. You have to get the timing right. I think that is very important, and today it might actually be a good idea if you don't do very much. I think if you were to do very much, or if you were to try to do stuff, particularly if you were trying to, accomplish a lot of things, then I just think you'd be disappointed. And things just aren't working out in that sense. And so, it's perhaps not, it's not just you preparing for the new moon, it's everyone else preparing for the new moon. And it's just, yeah, the time is not right. But if you do try to start something, if you try to get support, if you try to make people enthusiastic about something, I think you could end up being very disappointed. In fact, at the moment, your perception of other people, once you get close to them, once you start talking to them, it's a little bit grim. No one seems to have any enthusiasm. They just don't seem to want to do anything, or at least they don't want to do anything your way. And also, I don't think they're going to be very encouraging. A lot of the way we feel is about the extent to which we are supported and encouraged by our social environment. And I don't think that encouragement is forthcoming. So I think it's very important that you accept that situation, and you don't try to force it. You can't make something happen out of nothing, and you perhaps have to work out, where is the action? The action is perhaps in your own brain. It's in that part of you that is secluded, that is about perhaps planning and thinking but not acting. And if you are, I suppose, on your own trying to think things through, then I think you can be quite inspired. And there is this Grand Trine in Earth signs, Moon in late Virgo, trine Uranus and Pluto. So that Grand Trine in Earth signs can be helpful to you, Libra, provided you use it in the right way. It's not an invitation to take action. It's an invitation to observe and be inspired, to think about perhaps what you might like to do, not today, not even tomorrow, but in a few days' time, what might be your next plan, what might be something that excites you. But it's a slow process, and it's not a time to be in the center of things. It's not a time to try to initiate action, because if you were to do that, I don't think that you'd be successful. Now, if you're in the Americas, it's a slightly different message, because the moon does move into Libra. So the moon moves into Libra, it moves into Libra at 11:20 p.m. London time, which is a bit too late if you're in the UK, perhaps to take advantage of that. But if you're in New York, if you're on the East Coast of America, then that would be 20 past 6 in the evening. If you're in California, that would be 20 past 3 in the afternoon. So, Alaska, Hawaii, even earlier. So if you are in the Americas, during the last half of the day, you do get the sign change from moon moving from Virgo to Libra, and you might feel a sudden lift. You might feel that suddenly things are more positive, more action orientated, and you might just feel that you can really take advantage of that change. Well, I don't know what your plans are for this evening. Perhaps you've got nothing planned, in which case you should probably keep it like that. Although the moon is moving into Libra, although that will give you more inspiration, will make you feel more positive, it's still the run up to the new moon. The new moon eclipse is just not until tomorrow. So perhaps if you're in the Americas at the end of the day, there is a certain amount of increased positivity, increased enthusiasm, but still, don't take it too far. It's just the beginning of something, and if you act too early, then that could, I suppose, it could spoil things. So Libra, I think that's a pretty short description of what's happening. Just wait, prepare, think. Be inspired, but you don't actually have to act on your inspirations. Scorpio, people around you, or some people around you, are perhaps feeling a little bit negative. It's not just you. I think looking at the world at the moment, it's a run up to a new moon. It's the dead part of an old lunar cycle. It's not going anywhere. Yeah, the lunar cycle is pretty much dead, and I think a lot of people are feeling that. Maybe they're just feeling uninspired. They're feeling exhausted. They may give the impression of being boring. So, what do you do about it? Well, Scorpio, I think you do have the capacity to create a bit of change, to maybe make people more enthusiastic and give people a different view. And in some respects, Scorpio, you can be a little bit of an example today. So it's not about explaining what you would like to happen or explaining, what is the best state of mind to have. It's just being yourself and doing something that is perhaps dramatic, but just also feels very natural. So, for example, Scorpio, if you want to take a social initiative, then now might actually be the right time to do it. Now, normally, we're told that, or at least if you listen to me, I kind of take the view that the period just before a new moon is not really a time for taking initiatives. But if you were to take some small social initiative, I think actually it could work very well. I mean, not in a sort of high-profile, super exciting sense, but it could just be the right thing to do. And I think that your sensitivity could just be spot on. You'll just know how to behave, and you'll know how to push things to the limit, but not beyond the limit. And if you can possibly do that, then I think that would be a good thing to do. And I think that you can actually make people feel happier and sort of more comfortable. And of course, there's a reminder that, as I keep saying, Venus is starting to move to a trine of Mars. Venus is in Scorpio. So your social abilities are good, and I think they're slowly getting better. And I suppose you can use your social abilities to cheer people up and to sort of gently sort of move things along. But you have your limits, and if you're in the Americas, then this afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, the moon does leave Virgo and it moves into Libra. And so at the end of the day, if you're in the Americas, you start to feel the final run-up to the new moon, because the new moon is tomorrow. And I think with that final run-up, you're perhaps going to want to withdraw. I think you may feel you've done your best. Perhaps it's worked, perhaps it's not worked, but you can't do any more. And so a sense of backing off, might be good, especially if you're in the Americas. I think that if you're not in the Americas, then you can keep going for longer, and the moon won't move. The moon won't move into Libra until tomorrow. Okay, very late in the evening if you're in the UK or Portugal. I think Portugal and the UK are on the same time zone. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it won't be until tomorrow that the moon moves into Libra. So I suppose that's the overall message for Scorpio. Do what you can. I think you can do quite a lot today, and you can inspire people and you can motivate people, and you try your best, but you don't want to push it harder than you can. I think you can bring people together. You can go some way towards creating relationships, improving relationships, perhaps creating contacts which in the past hadn't existed. That's something you can do, but only up to a point. And so, Scorpio, I think you just have to recognize when is the right time to stop. Sagittarius, you feel that something needs to happen. there's always a sense of happenings, isn't there? It was out of a sort of a 60s concept, always looking for a happening. You don't not satisfied with just the way things are, being able to create a happening out of nowhere, and that might be something that Sagittarians can do. And I suppose it's a time when many people are going to sort of need that Sagittarian energy, including Sagittarius itself, because I think that it is a time when many people are feeling a bit flat, when they just feel that nothing is going on. In the northern hemisphere, we have the realization that autumn is here and it's getting colder. I understand it's different if you're in the southern hemisphere, but there may be a certain uneasiness about the changing seasons. That might be part of it, but it just feels like now, with the run up to the new moon, that nothing is going on, and people are looking for inspiration. And it just may be that Sagittarius can go some way towards providing a bit of inspiration and making a suggestion. You don't have to make a huge suggestion. It can just be something like, let's do it now. And if you do that, then you might be able to create something out of nothing. That really is possible. But it's not just all about having fun and being inspired, or at least trying to create inspiration and fun in what seems to be an environment which isn't particularly sympathetic towards that kind of thing. And I suppose it's a Tuesday. I mean, is it going to be an exciting Tuesday? Well, I don't know. Possibly not. But perhaps if anyone can make it an exciting Tuesday, perhaps it's you. Now, don't forget also, Sagittarius, your own priorities and your own agenda. In other words, don't forget to be selfish. It's sometimes important to be selfish, and there is a Grand Trine today involving the Moon, Uranus, and Pluto, because the Moon trines Uranus, trines Pluto, and Moon is in Virgo. Moon is in late Virgo, and I think that Grand Trine is going to help you to advance your own ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be. We all have ambitions. They may not necessarily always be material ambitions, but they're ambitions nonetheless. So if there's something you really want to do, and it is of the nature of an ambition, then I think today there are things you can do to certainly advance your ambitions, and perhaps to do it quite quickly. And it may be that you think there's going to be resistance, but actually there won't be any resistance at all. It will be much easier than expected. And in fact, you just don't have to push things too hard. Indeed, it would not be a good idea to push things too hard, because it would be so easy to take things too far. And you can see what I mean if you just look at the chart. You look at what's happening today. Look at Jupiter. Jupiter, if you see what's going on, Jupiter is right in the middle of Mars and Uranus. You can see, midpoints are sometimes a little bit difficult to see, but in this case you can see it definitely. You can see Jupiter is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Now, we can look at that in two different ways. One way of looking at it is what I was just saying about you being an exciting person. That's Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. You are someone who can make things happen. And if anyone can provide excitement and action, it's you. And that's very much a plus. But Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint can have a dangerous element, because Mars-Uranus as a pair can be representative of being too hasty, being too dramatic, being in the mood for taking risks, perhaps with physical objects, maybe being accident prone. So don't take it too far with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. You need a sense of proportion, and you need to understand how your thoughts are having an impact on your actions. And you see, what may actually be happening, Sagittarius, if we look at the overall picture, is that, you see, there are no planets in fire signs at the moment. And okay, you could count Chiron and a North Node in Aries, but with no planets in fire signs, you feel that. You want the inspiration that fire can provide. Fire, remember the fire signs, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. There's nothing in those three signs except, well, Chiron and North Node in Aries. So you may be tempted to make an extra effort to find action. And in your attempts to create action, in your attempts to create something dramatic, you may go too far. Remembering there is that Grand Trine in Earth, there isn't much resistance. So you put too much energy into something, and then things could go wrong, and you might find that you've gone too far, and that you perhaps realize that once you got what you wanted, you've got far too much of a good thing on your hands. So a bit of proportion, Sagittarius, would be a good idea. You don't have to use too much energy. You mustn't feel this sense that you have to compensate for the fact that there's no fire in the sky. Just let things happen. Things can work at different levels. It doesn't just have to work at the level of fire. With the Earth Grand Trine, it can work at the level of Earth. Just little small movements, small perceptible movements. That is enough, and that is enough to change things. If you throw everything into it as a way of trying to compensate, then that could get you into trouble. Capricorn. So Capricorn, we have got a Grand Trine in Earth signs, another Grand Trine in Earth signs. I think this is the third time I've talked about Grand Trines in Earth signs. We had Sun making a Grand Trine with Uranus and Pluto. In other words, Sun, trine Uranus, trine Pluto. Then we had Mercury, and now we've got the Moon. Now the Moon is a much faster planet than the Sun and Mercury, but still, things are moving, and the Earth signs are well represented because of this trine. And so, as a Capricorn, you can feel that things are happening, and you may decide that now is the time to create some kind of movement. Now, if you want to create happenings, if you want to create movement, then you've got to be forward thinking. You can't just do things in the usual way. You've got to look at perhaps what other people are suggesting, be prepared to consider new ideas, and don't be afraid of anything just because it's unfamiliar. You are able to take something that feels unfamiliar, you're able to look at what it is, look at the details of the matter, make a decision about whether it's suitable, and then you can put it into action. So give everything a try, at least in the sense of research it, see if it might work, and then see what happens. And so, Capricorn, I do think that you're able to energize things and take what appears to be something very small, almost non-existent, and make the absolute most of it, and actually be able to leverage it. I suppose, yesterday I was looking at people who had the Sun conjunct Mercury, and I was looking at the horoscope of Edward Teller, was a Capricorn, and Edward Teller was the man who invented the hydrogen bomb. And so, it's obviously not very nice, hydrogen bombs and the destruction caused by them, but perhaps there's a nice principle there. Taking something small and insignificant, the Teller Ulam device, this small thing, and you can create something that causes massive impact that can, bring together the whole power of the universe. With a hydrogen bomb, fusing the atom with fusion and creating the power of the sun. Okay, I know that's a bit of hyperbole, but what I'm saying is don't doubt yourself. You can take something small, and however small it is, you can leverage it many, many, many times over. And it just requires a little bit of effort. I mean, not much effort, just that first push. And so that's perhaps what we're talking about when we're talking about that Grand Trine in Earth, Moon Trine Uranus, Moon Trine Pluto. It can all come together. And so you don't actually need many resources in order to achieve massive effects. But don't allow yourself to be distracted. There could be distractions because, the moon, as it moves through late Virgo, it does make an opposition to Neptune. And it's just possible that that opposition to Neptune could represent a distraction. It may be someone else trying to distract you, or you very temporarily focus on a wrong thing. You're trying to look at things from a larger perspective, but you find yourself temporarily getting distracted by things that are unimportant, and that slows you down. And that may indicate that you need to be a little bit careful who you hang out with. Certain people could be a distraction, and ideally you want to stay out of their way or not listen too hard to what they're talking about. But that shouldn't take away from the fact that it can be a day where things really are happening, where you can really make something happen out of nothing. Now, at the end of the day, if you're in the Americas, Moon does move into Libra, and that does create a change. So late afternoon, early evening, if you're in the Americas, then you might feel a sense that whatever you've learned, whatever you've discovered, has to be harnessed, and you have to focus it in the right direction. And you may feel that you're being challenged to do this, that this is what society wants. And so you have to do what you want. That's true. And you've got your ambitions. That's good. You need to pursue your ambitions. That's good. But it does have to be on your terms. And so when the moon goes into Libra, yes, you need to make things real, and you need to start to perhaps consider your ambitions and what you're trying to achieve. Even if it's late in the day. I know people are winding down late in the day, but it's still something that you might want to do, and you might want to make a start, but only making a start, because when the moon goes into Libra, it's just a reminder that the sun and the moon are in the same sign, that you've got this run up to the new moon eclipse tomorrow. So American Capricorns, there may be something you feel you want to do at the end of the day. It is important, and you feel it's important, but don't take it too seriously, and ideally it should be kind of exploratory. You don't want to be in a situation where you've agreed to do something, or you've set yourself on a particular path right at the end of a lunar cycle, because things are still up in the air, and it's best to wait until after the new moon. But I'll be talking about the new moon. Well, I'll be talking about the new moon in general later in this video, but I'll be talking about the new moon specifically and about how it relates to Capricorns. I'll be talking about that tomorrow. Aquarius, it's a bit of a changeover day. You feel that you're neither one place or the other, and as a result of that, you might have a certain sense of uncertainty. You're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing or where you're supposed to be going. Though I think it's probably best not to make a change today. I think there's going to be a temptation to make a change today, to kind of change your approach. But I think it's just very important that you are able to see things through to the end. And I think you'll know where the end is if you're honest with yourself. So if you're involved with something, if you're involved in an activity or even just a train of thought, then do see that train of thought about activity through until the conclusion, because it's right at the end where you might start to understand what it's all about. And that is because we've got this Grand Trine today involving Moon, Uranus and Pluto. So Moon trine Uranus, Moon trine Pluto, and it's a Grand Trine that is quite introspective from an Aquarian perspective. It's inviting you to go sort of deep down into who you are, what you're about, to really work out what inspires you and dig down into who you are. And when the Moon trines Uranus, trines Pluto, there may be a sense of connectedness, that you are in touch with something that maybe is beyond yourself, that maybe is quite difficult to verbalize, but it will just still feel that you are actually in touch with the future. And then perhaps over the next couple of days, it'll be easier to start to make sense of it. And that could start as early as late this afternoon, this evening, if you are in the Americas, when the moon moves into Libra. But the moon will move into Libra tomorrow if you're in other parts of the world. So that's what I mean by a changeover. You're moving from a period of perhaps deep thought, where you're trying to really work things out in quite a private way, to a stage where you are more expansive, where you take your insights and you start to think about where they are all leading you. And so that could be something that you're starting to think about. And I'm thinking also, Aquarius, that you are actually quite in tune with your power. At the moment, you do have a lot of power, and you're able to focus this power in actually sort of quite a powerful way. Power and powerful. Focus, yes. You can really decide on what matters and just give it everything you've got. But it's all quite private. You don't have to tell people what's going on. You can do it in your own way, and then you'll see the results at a later stage. Of course, it may be that you are pushed. If people come into your life, make demands, make requests, ask you to do things, and you are forced to respond to the world. Now, if you are forced to respond to the world, then yes, you can, I think, have a sort of a public demonstration of who you are and what you're capable of doing. And I think it will be quite clear that you really are a strong person, that you're not someone to mess with. So I think that is very fortunate. And in terms of other people, right now, you are in a stronger position than other people. You know more from them. You have a better understanding of what's happening. Now, they might claim, you might have people that make all sorts of claims, that claim they know best, that they claim they've got all the answers. But Aquarius, it's all nonsense. And you do know fundamentally that you're the one with the answers. Okay, I know that sounds a bit of a sweeping statement. Okay, you don't know everything. There are certainly always going to be areas where someone knows more than you. But, by and large, today and perhaps into tomorrow, you should take the view that you have at least most of the answers, and that you don't really need anyone to direct you or give you advice. Pisces, Jupiter is in quite an interesting position. And, remember, Jupiter is your ruler. And Jupiter, if you look at the chart, you can see that Jupiter is let me just switch this around, put Pisces on the left. If you look at the chart, you will see that Jupiter is between Uranus and Mars. So we've got Uranus in Taurus, we've got Jupiter in Gemini, and we've got Mars in Cancer. And if you look at the actual position of Jupiter, it's right in the middle. You can see this for yourself. Look, there's Mars at 15 Cancer, there's Uranus at 26, 27 Taurus, so the mean of 15 and 27 is about 21, so you can see that Jupiter is on the Uranus-Mars midpoint, and you can see that by eye. So you're very much influenced by that Mars-Uranus pairing. Now, that is a mixed blessing. The problem with Mars and Uranus as a pair is that they can be a little bit accident prone. Mars is a planet of violence, Uranus is a planet of earthquakes. You put it together and you can get quite a difficult situation. Things might go wrong very quickly and unexpectedly with that Mars-Uranus pair. And so you put Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and if you take things too far, you could easily get yourself into trouble. You could just be in too much of a hurry to get things done, and perhaps your brain or your heart is working faster than your body, and you trip up. So make sure that that doesn't happen. Or I suppose if you're walking down a mountain, your feet can sometimes be walking faster than your body, and you have a fall. So look out for that. And if you feel that you're in a hurry, don't allow that feeling of being in a hurry to have an impact on your outer behavior, or if you're driving or whatever. So do be careful with that Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. But there is a plus side to Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. It's about you being action-orientated, wanting things to happen, feeling actually a sense of agency, feeling that you can actually make things happen. Yes, you can. And that does give you a lot of power. And I suppose the question is, what do you actually do with that power, and how do you use that power? And probably, Pisces, you shouldn't feel that it's always down to you. What about the rest of the world? What are other people doing? Maybe you can get help from other people, get advice from other people, use other people's strength. And we see that today we have a Grand Trine in Earth signs, and the moon is in late Virgo. It's about to move into Libra, but it is in late Virgo. And Virgo is, of course, the opposite sign to Pisces. So the moon in Virgo could be representative of another person, and it's making a trine to Uranus, trine to Pluto. So that Grand Trine could make certain people quite excitable if they're given the right level of stimulation. They can move, and they can have access to things that ordinary people don't have access to. So perhaps, Pisces, you should bring other people together with whatever you're trying to do, and it's perhaps a good day for planning, excited planning. For action, well, maybe, but we are at the dead end of a lunar cycle. The lunar cycle is coming to an end. That might mean it's not a great time to sort of start things, even though there is this excitement, sort of that something needs to happen with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So that's why I think it might be more of a time for preparation. I think that's rather than actually making things happen. But overall, Pisces, I think it is a good day. I mean, it's a potentially dangerous day with Jupiter on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. But if you're able to use the energies in the correct way with a certain amount of responsibility, and you're mindful of the fact that it is the end of the lunar cycle, and perhaps it might be a good idea to wait until after the new moon before really initiating things. If you bear that in mind, then I think overall things can work quite well for you. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at today, Tuesday, October the 1st, from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 36, which is darkening of the light. Now, it doesn't sound great, does it? So, what darkening of the light, I suppose, means is, whatever our light is, it's not being revealed. There's something we have to hide, or perhaps we're being forced to hide. It may be just a situation we're in where we're just not given the recognition we deserve. And Greg Winkup, he actually calls this hexagram something like the bright pheasant. And the reason he calls it the bright pheasant is because he's talking about some court official who is spectacular, who is like a pheasant with all its coloured feathers, is spectacular, but is not being recognised. And so perhaps that is part of the issue with darkening of the light. We may feel that we have got a lot to say, a lot to communicate, but we just can't do it, and we're not getting the recognition we deserve. And I suppose to an extent this may fit in with what's going on astrologically. We are at the end of a lunar cycle. We have got a partial eclipse, an annular eclipse coming up tomorrow, and so with this annular eclipse coming up tomorrow, that's when the sun and the moon are together, and so that may give us an idea about what is happening. We perhaps do feel a little bit eclipsed, and that we just can't really bring ourselves to bear on the world around us because other people perhaps are focusing on something else. We may feel that perhaps people who aren't as worthy as us, who aren't as talented as us, are getting all the attention, but we're being ignored. But it's a temporary situation. It's not going to go on forever. So I don't think that we should panic about the situation. It sometimes happens, and perhaps you could say, what else do you expect at the end of a lunar cycle in the run up to an annular eclipse? Now, the top line does move, and the top line is about the darkening reaching a kind of a peak. There is maximum darkness, and that might come about at some stage. And so perhaps we need to accept that. So if we feel that we're not being listened to, we're not being taken seriously, there may be a sense where we're encouraged to make an extra effort to be noticed. And that's not going to work. Because if we make an extra effort to be noticed, then in the end, that could create conflict. And it's not going to do us any good. And one way of looking at that top line moving is something falling to the earth. It gets completely obscured and eclipsed. And Greg Winkup talks about the pheasant falling to earth, and that's a reminder we have to accept the times in which we are living. And if we are modest and we accept that we're not getting enough attention, we accept that we're not getting enough attention, but we just accept that that's the way it is, and we allow things to work their way through, then that final top hexagram won't be us falling to earth. It will perhaps be someone else falling to earth, someone else falling from grace. Perhaps the people who have made all these claims to be experts and who have been crowding us out. Just be patient. Things will work themselves out, and it's certainly not a time for taking the initiative. And I think we saw that with the lunar cycle, but we're moving towards the end of the lunar cycle, and then we move to the second hexagram, because we do have a moving line, and so the moving line is the top line moves, so that means that we move to hexagram number 22, which is grace. That's a very nice hexagram. Nothing is happening. It's all about what we look like, and it's about appearances. And so this is a reminder perhaps of how we should be behaving. We should be modest, and it is about appearances. And in the first instance, we don't have to tell people what we can do. We don't have to have grudges. We can just be nice, and that's enough. And once we've reached that stage, in the end, we'll be moving to something else. We'll be moving into a situation where we really can be ourselves and be recognized. But to begin with, it's surface appearances that matter. It's not about showing off what we can do. So I think that we can perhaps see the way this whole thing moves. We start off feeling that we're not getting enough appreciation. Then something happens. Hopefully that something happens because other people outdo themselves and fall from grace. And that's not us falling from grace, because we're being modest, hopefully. And that happening, we then move to the next stage, which is grace, where we don't boast, we don't show any Schadenfreude about in terms of what's happening to other people. We just come over as being pleasant, nice people, and then we get the appreciation we deserve, and in the end, we can start to reveal our true talents. Okay, so I now want to consider the annular eclipse. So the annular eclipse, it is tomorrow on Wednesday, and so let's just look at this eclipse. So here is the chart of the eclipse, and it's a partial eclipse, and there it is, Sun and the Moon at 10 degrees for Libra, and it's close to the South Node. So when you have an eclipse, it will by definition be on the nodal axis, and because it's an annular eclipse, it's the Moon is a long way from the Earth. That means that the disk of the Moon is relatively small, and so it doesn't cover the Sun, and that is why it's not a total eclipse. So I'm not saying that this eclipse, this solar eclipse, is super dramatic, but I think that it's something that we do need to take note of, and we need to consider, what is important about this eclipse. So I've set this eclipse for London. I mean, forget the ascendant and the midheaven here, but just look at what the main events are. Sun is at 10 degrees 4 Libra. Moon is at 10 degrees 4 Libra. Black Moon Lilith is at 10:22 Libra. Mercury is at 11:33 Libra. So this new moon does have a certain Black Moon Lilith feel to it. I think that might represent, on a personal level, that many of us have to deal with things that are from the past, and we perhaps have to accept what the past was. And sometimes the past isn't great, and we need to perhaps go deep and ask questions about what did happen, and we have to perhaps be comfortable with our own darkness with this new moon on Black Moon Lilith. It's not all sweetness and light. That's certainly true. So we have to be honest, and we shouldn't hide, because if you start to hide whatever Black Moon Lilith represents, then perhaps it can get nasty. That's kind of the way it works. But also, this new moon is conjunct Mercury. And if we take away Black Moon Lilith, new moon conjunct Mercury, it is about communication. It has to be. New moon conjunct Mercury, there are so many things to be said. And the way people communicate is going to be important. And getting the message right does matter. Though I think there may be a temptation to talk too much. Perhaps with Mercury conjunct Black Moon Lilith as well, what are people going to be saying? People may be saying things which they might turn out to be somewhat twisted. There is a twist there. So we perhaps shouldn't take too seriously what other people are saying, in the sense that we shouldn't take it to heart. I think that's going to matter over the next few weeks. But the new moon is also about the collective and what's happening in the world in which we live. So communication systems are going to be important, and messaging is going to matter. And I suppose it's also going to be about how governments message with new moon conjunct Mercury, and there may be just a new phase in the messaging cycle. I suppose we've got messaging cycles, you could say, as far as the United States election. We have messages about what's happening in the United States election. New moon, you'd expect there to be a change in sentiment one way or another, whether it's in favor of Kamala Harris or in favor of Donald Trump. So we might expect something to be happening there, because it's a new lunar cycle, and this lunar cycle takes us actually very close to the election itself, because the next new moon after this is on November the 1st. So the next new moon is 4 days before the election, and so it does represent something new, something very different. Now, when you've got this kind of new moon, it's important to try to understand what's happening deep down in this new moon. And I just feel with this new moon that we don't see everything. Okay, I know that some people who are using traditional astrology might notice, for example, that this new moon is ruled, because it's in Libra, is ruled by Venus. And so Venus is in Scorpio. And so perhaps that Venus in Scorpio is telling us something about this new moon. And so you could say, oh, well, new moon in Libra, that's all sort of on the surface, and it's all very nice and communication, but there is a dark underside there. I mean, I think we already saw this with the fact that the new moon is on conjunct true Black Moon Lilith, but it's also ruled by Venus in Scorpio. And in a way, Venus in Scorpio is giving a similar message to true Black Moon Lilith. There is a sort of a dark underside here. And so perhaps on the surface, people are going to be saying, oh, well, everything's fine, but underneath, we have to sort of be careful. There may be things going on that people don't want to talk about, but nonetheless are very important. Now, turning to the 90-degree dial. Now, the 90-degree dial is just a way of looking at the new moon sort of from a sort of X-ray perspective, and it perhaps isn't quite as visual as the regular birth chart, but it's always good to look at what midpoints the new moon is on. So there you see I put the pointer on the new moon. You see Mercury is close to the new moon, to see, what is happening, what aspects are there. And this new moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. So you see there's Jupiter, there's Pluto, and the new moon is right there on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. Actually, let me just show you that so you can see it for yourself. So there's Jupiter, there's Pluto, and this new moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. And I think actually that is very good, because the principle of Jupiter-Pluto is about self-improvement. It's about not being satisfied with the way things are, the way we are at the moment, just having that certain sense of dissatisfaction. And we just know that things could be better. And because we know that things are better, then there is scope for improvement. So over the next 2 to 4 weeks, we just absolutely should not be satisfied with second best. This new moon is a time when we can look at who we are and what we are, and realize that there's work to be done. It's work in progress. So all of us should consider where we are now and where we want to be, say, by the new moon on November the 1st. There are areas which we just know are just not good enough. Perhaps we've been complacent, we've been lazy, but we can make it just so much better if we were to try. So I think that is something very positive about the new moon, which I think all of us can use. Now, there is something else about this new moon which is perhaps a little disturbing, and it's this. Let me show you. So if we put the Aries point on the dial, so if we put 0 degrees Aries on the 90-degree dial, we can see that the Aries point is exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's exactly making a sort of a semi-square sesquiquadrate, 1 minute orb. And it's not just that, it's on the you've got the Hades Saturn midpoint. You see that? You've got Saturn here, then you've got a Mars Hades aspect here. So you've got the Mars Hades and Saturn, and it's all on the Aries point. So the Aries point represents the world at large. It's a point of contact, Aries, but it sort of goes outwards. So the North Node is about our social contacts, but the Aries is about the world. And so with the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, that, and also the Hades Saturn midpoint, that indicates that this new moon is quite dangerous. It's about perhaps a lot of people getting killed. It's about big tragedy. It's about perhaps something terrible happening, and a sense of doom, a sense that it's a dangerous world in which we're living. Now, the way it's going to happen, and this is a problem with the new moon, is that where on earth is it going to happen? It's probably going to happen in one place, and it's probably going to be, I suppose it's going to be perhaps part of an existing war, and it may be very difficult to say, oh, it happened because of this new moon. It may be part of an ongoing tragedy, whether it's in Ukraine or Middle East, or this could be somewhere else. But I think Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is locked into that new moon, and that Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint it's a very serious aspect. It is about death and destruction. Hassan Nasrallah, who has just been assassinated by the Israelis, he had Aries aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint. Vladimir Zelensky had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Victoria Nuland had Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Remember, she was a former State Department employee who had played such a big role in stirring up the Maidan revolt in the Ukraine, which led to the Ukraine war. Actually, Adolf Hitler had Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it's a very difficult midpoint. Of course, it can represent personal tragedy. Princess Diana, who was born on the same day as Victoria Nuland, she had Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it is tough. And this is a very, very close Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it's really baked into the chart of the new moon. So I think that means that on a collective level, we can expect things to be difficult. On a personal level, as I said, focus on the fact that the new moon is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. Now, as far as where on Earth, I'm just going to look at a few locations where this new moon seems to be relatively prominent. So let's so for a start, we can look at well, we might as well look at the world map first. So look at where places which come to mind as far as I'm concerned. The British Isles comes to mind, actually. You can see that at the time of the new moon, Mars was exactly on the IC. It will be exactly on the IC in Dublin, and we do have Uranus conjunct the ascendant in Scotland, Venus on the descendant here. So Ireland. Ireland's had its problems, and I have pointed out Ireland every now and then. But Ireland has issues, with the whole sort of immigration crisis. That Ireland doesn't seem to be a nation that's particularly comfortable with itself at the moment, and I don't think that new moon is especially helpful. So that's one place. You look at the Americas. Mars seems to be on the descendant. At the time of the new moon, and I'll be looking at that chart in sort of more detail. Now, as far as Asia is concerned, there is a place. New moon is on the IC, going through Western India, sort of Bombay, and you've got Mars conjunct the ascendant. So it may be that Western India is somewhere we need to look at. So let's just look at some relocated charts just to see what might be happening there. So let's do the Dublin relocation. So here's a new moon relocated for Dublin. And if you relocate that new moon for Dublin, you get Mars exactly on the IC. You get Venus in Scorpio on a descendant here. So you get the Venus-Mars trine is hitting the angles in Dublin, and so with that, certainly with a Mars conjunct the IC, I think that there's going to be further trouble. I suspect in Dublin. You think logically it might be about protests against immigration, and that is something that could happen. So I think there could be further unrest in this country. And looking at Bombay, so it's not called Bombay anymore, it's called Mumbai, but so apologies if you're Indian and I've got Bombay on the chart. It's set for Mumbai. So if you look at this chart set for, this is sort of for Western India, you have Mars rising, and you have a new moon fairly close to the IC. So this is Western India. It's not, of course. Delhi is the capital of India. So sort of Mumbai is more the commercial capital, but it may be there are events in Western India that are related to this new moon. I think that is possible. I wouldn't have thought they'd be particularly easy, but simply because Mars is close to the ascendant. So the other place is Washington, D.C. We mustn't forget Washington, D.C. So here's the new moon set for Washington, D.C. Set for Washington, D.C., Mars is exactly on the descendant. And so with Mars exactly on a descendant, that is not easy. Mars on a descendant can represent hostilities. It can be about war. It can be about foreign adversaries. Or it just might be, as we saw with Dublin on Mars on the IC, just a country that is not comfortable with itself. And so we may expect perhaps a certain amount of vitriol around the place in Washington, D.C. And in fact, we've got Venus on the midheaven with Mars on the descendant. So Venus in Scorpio on the midheaven. Venus in Scorpio is in a bad position because it's in its detriment. It's in its detriment, and Mars is on the seventh house cusp. Now this is not the presidential lunation, in the sense that the lunation does end on November the 1st. So you might say, oh, Venus is on the midheaven. That's a good sign that Kamala's going to win. But I wouldn't have said so, because the lunation ends on November the 1st. Okay, you could say, well, it's a partial. If you are a supporter of Kamala, you might say, well, this is an annular eclipse. It is an eclipse. The eclipse before the election has Venus on the midheaven, therefore Kamala's going to win. You could argue that. I wouldn't argue that, but at the moment. But I think you might see it as evidence of Kamala winning. That's, of course, not an outcome I think is going to happen, but still, I think we have to certainly be aware of that. But also Mars is on the IC. Mars is on the descendant, and there is a lot of aggression there. Turning to a few people that might be influenced by this new moon. So Catherine, Princess Catherine, who of course has been sick recently, and Princess Catherine, she's got Mars at 10 degrees 28 Libra, and so she's going to have the new moon on her Mars. And this new moon, remember, I suppose it's a new moon which is on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. So that might be how it feels to her. So you could say, well, Mars, she's going to be really trying. You could say, if you wanted to look at it from a personal perspective, if she was asking for advice on what she should do with the new moon on her Mars, I suppose you could say, well, Mars could be physical activity. It could be, and with the new moon on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, it might be about her trying to do things to make herself feel better. You could say it could be about exercise or something like that. Her building herself up, using her energy in a sort of a constructive way. I mean, of course, that sounds very vague. Also, you could say, well, hold on, Mars could be Prince William, could be her husband, because Mars is a male planet and it might be projected. So with a new moon on her Mars, I think that it might represent something going on in William's life, not necessarily something going on in her life. And so, that's why I think when you've got a female chart and you've got an aspect to the Sun and the Mars, it's often not felt by the woman herself. It's felt by the men in her life. So that is a possibility. And so that new moon may say something about William and what William is up to, something going on in his life which he has to create some kind of a change. A point of departure for William. So that is perhaps a way of interpreting it. Boris Now, Boris has been keeping a low profile to an extent, hasn't he? Boris, of course, hasn't been prime minister for some time now. Still supporting Ukraine as crazy as ever. Desperate to keep this war going. But this new moon is on his ascendant. And I would probably see that new moon on his ascendant as potentially being quite positive. And the reason I would have said it was positive is because, he's perhaps been out of the limelight, but we now have a Labour government that is just started, but it's in deep trouble. And so, again, if I was advising Boris, I would probably say this new moon is a good thing, and it's perhaps a time to sort of relaunch himself on the public arena. And so that's something that Boris could do. Now, when you're looking at these kind of things, I often find it's quite good to look at the midpoints. So we have a time of birth for him. So what kind of midpoints does his ascendant have? So we might look at Boris's ascendant midpoints. So you can see that Boris has. His ascendant is on a Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, the Jupiter-Uranus and the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. It is on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint and the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. But let's try to be positive and look at the Jupiter-Saturn and Jupiter-Uranus midpoints. So you see there's Boris's ascendant. You can see there's Jupiter-Saturn. It's ascendant directly on the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint. And also on a Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, that will make a square to it. So with those midpoints, the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is about, Jupiter-Saturn is about the economic cycle, and it's a very political pairing, Jupiter-Saturn. Jupiter-Uranus is about freedom, being himself. And so I think Boris, with this new moon, is going to want to increase his public profile. Maybe he's already says things about things which he thinks are important, in particular Ukraine, but maybe other things he wants to say, and perhaps with the Labour government in a state of disarray, he may feel that now is the time. Now, someone else who has got Jupiter on their ascendant, a new moon on their ascendant, is the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. So Viktor Orban has got his ascendant at 8 degrees 42 Libra, and his Jupiter is at. He's also born at 2 p.m. Obviously not in New York, in a place in Hungary which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. So he has got that new moon is actually on his, he's got his Jupiter at 12 degrees 24 Aries, his ascendant at 842 Libra. So that new moon is on his ascendant. It's aspecting his ascendant Jupiter midpoint. So new moon on the ascendant, this may be a time where Viktor Orban feels he's already got quite a big public role, but he may even want to sort of intensify this role. He may feel that he's got something to contribute, something to say. Of course, if you are a politician and you're a controversial politician and you've got new moon on the ascendant, you should always regard it as being potentially dangerous, even though it doesn't necessarily suggest any danger. Just new moon on the ascendant, it's generically dangerous for a politician to have new moon on the ascendant, even if in practice it turns out to be fortunate. I think on balance, I think the new moon on Viktor Orban's ascendant will be fortunate. I think it will enable him to project himself, though I suppose you could also say that the new moon is square his midheaven, and so the new moon is sort of on his ascendant midheaven midpoint as well. So I think that we may be hearing more of Viktor Orban over the next 2 to 4 weeks, probably in a fortunate light, and perhaps he feels, in terms of what's going on in Ukraine, maybe in terms of his own country as well, he feels he can sort of project himself more. So it's kind of similar to what's going on with Boris, even though Boris and Orban have completely different views on the subject of Ukraine. And turning to Argentina, the president of Argentina, Javier Milei, he's a Libra, born on October 22nd, 1970. And he has got Uranus on the IC. And that new moon, this annular eclipse is exactly on his Uranus IC midpoint. And it's on his Uranus. I would think that this might actually be quite dangerous for him. That he needs to be very, very careful. Now, it may be with this new moon on the IC that he wants to do something dramatic. He wants to put into action some new policy or whatever. But, IC is a very vulnerable point. And he does actually need to consider his security, who his enemies are. I'm sure Javier Milei has got a lot of enemies in Argentina. I mean, he's trying to completely unpick the whole system. A lot of people from the old regime are very unhappy about it. And so I think that Uranus on the IC, it may be dissent. It may be attempts to undermine his position. Could it affect his life? Security, safety? I mean, probably not. But I suppose it is the IC. I mean, I think he has to be careful. I think over the next month he needs to make sure everything is secure and everything is in order, because I think that new moon could potentially make him somewhat vulnerable. So then there is the final person I want to look at is I want to look at Iran as well. But Benjamin Netanyahu has his Mercury at 942 Libra. So he does have a new moon conjunct his Mercury. So I would have said that, Benjamin Netanyahu has got a lot to say for himself. And he's going to be very active in terms of what he's communicating in Israel and perhaps abroad as well. I mean, I think there are things going on in his chart. Remember, he's got Uranus. He's just had Uranus square his Mars. He had Uranus square his Mars pretty much around the time that he did his attack on the Hezbollah headquarters. So perhaps we need to listen to what Netanyahu is saying. That's something that we need to consider. Now, one country is Iran. So Iran is in a bit of trouble at the moment. This bombing of the Hezbollah headquarters was, I think, a major embarrassment for them. Hezbollah is very much a sort of a client organization of Iran, and it's a big blow to their prestige, I would have said. And a lot of people were killed, the top leadership of Hezbollah, not just Hassan Nasrallah, plus I believe that Iranians were killed in there. And it's a really difficult time for Iran. And here is the Iranian regime. I've gone for April the 1st, 1979 at 3 p.m. And Iran has its sun at 11 Aries. So this new moon is opposition Iran's sun. And so I do think that there are questions about what is Iran all about. The sun represents sort of leadership, and the sun is perhaps undermining of that leadership. And so, perhaps the crisis in Iran will continue unabated, and with the new moon there are going to be significant challenges for the Iranian regime. Now, one thing I noticed that happened in the year before, 1978, is a fire in an Iranian cinema. There was a cinema called the Cinema Rex, and it caught fire on August 19th, 1978, and a lot of people were killed, and all sorts of people were blamed for this fire. And it took place in Abadan in Iran. I don't know, for some reason I've got 8:21 p.m. And it was seen as the beginning of the end for the regime. For some reason, this fire at the cinema, this was for the Shah's regime. And so at the time of this fire, the Mars was at 9:35 Libra. And so I don't know whether it's relevant, but I just noticed that this new moon is conjunct Mars, where Mars was at the time of the Cinema Rex fire. So there may be elements in terms of the Iranian people, Iranian consciousness that were around at the time of the Cinema Rex fire, which kind of get rekindled by this new moon. And so perhaps this new moon is in some ways going to create a new threat to Iran's internal authority. And I think Iran's bombing of Hezbollah may have had some impact on this. Okay, that's it for the new moon. I hope you found what I've said of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be very grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.